The U.S. military at West Point, they study military history. Gained an appreciation for them when I connected with some military people at the Citadel, and they call it the Southern version of West Point. And it's a rigorous training, and one thing they study is military history. And they study tactics. They're not there to be foot soldiers. They're there to lead our country. These elite people at West Point. And they study military history, but there's one nation they never study. It's this one. Because there is no strategy. There is no formula. Every battle Israel has ever fought has been a miracle of God. Every time they go on the battlefield, they've been outnumbered in their entire history. And so this is the apple of God's eye, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, and our relationship with it. So let's get this clicker going. Wanted to mention, here's 6 people. I'll come back to them. I don't expect you to memorize. No tests are being taken. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence willingly wrote their names down. But the thing is, at the end of the Revolutionary War, there was only about 22 of them that we ever heard about. Took office, became state representatives, became vice presidents, became members of the cabinet, because the others were dead. They gave their lives for this country. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And I want to share, I want this to be a day of appreciation and a launching at the same time of where we've come and what God is expecting of us this year, prophetically. A lot of people, a lot of heroes are never known, so I'm just going to go down the list. David Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister of Israel in 1948. He was a protege of Winston Churchill. A lot of people don't know that. Vladimir Jabotinsky was a radical, an author, a famous author and a Russian Jew, and he led thousands and thousands of Jews into Palestine before it was Israel without any government sanction. They just decided to just settle on the ultimate act of faith. Chaim Weizmann was a Jewish Russian inventor that helped win World War I and became a head of the world Zionist movement. Theodor Herzl was the actual creator and starter of the nation of Israel in 1890. Over a century ago, he started publishing a book about the need for Israel to become a nation. This was especially wild due to the fact that the Ottoman Turk Empire had ruled Palestine in the Middle East for 400 years. And there was no prospect, no belief, no faith in anybody's heart that Israel could ever be a nation. But he wrote books about the fact that we need to just start going to immigrate to Israel. Lloyd George was the prime minister of Britain in the turn of the century of 1900, and he moved the wheels of government to start the early stages of the creation of a Jewish state. A.J. Balfour was also a prime minister who became foreign secretary, and under the leading and pressure and sales job of Winston Churchill and other people, made a declaration that started the process of the whole world in establishing Israel and building Israel. Isaiah 66, the last chapter of Isaiah. A lot of people have made the connection that Isaiah has 66 books, the Bible has 66 books. And if you check the chapters of Isaiah, most of them have a correlation with the book whose number it is. Isaiah 66 is about the last generation on earth before the return of Christ. and it corresponds to the book of Revelation. It's amazing how God works things out. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things, that a land shall be born in a day? Shall a nation be brought forth in a moment? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. A lot of people don't know that travail, or childbirth pains, is a figure of speech for war. It means as soon as she was in travail, it's a short war. That Israel would become a nation in one day at the end of a short war. World War II was actually 4 years long. And at the end of it, Israel was born May 14th, 1948, which is so interesting because it matches with several types and shadows. The beginning of actually it's more than last year, the beginning of 2023, on January 2nd, God told me to stand up here and give a word at the start of 2023, and he had me declare Psalm 23 in English and then in Hebrew. And I didn't know why, he just said do it. But you see, when you declare a thing, it's the same as prayer. We are given the power to pray and then declare it to be a thing. God said, let there be light. He told Adam to name things. We are to name things and use his word as a weapon by speaking his word. When I sat down from giving my word, the Lord said to me, he said, this is 2023. Israel and America are going to war this year in the valley of the shadow. The valley of the shadow, verse 5 of Psalm 23, means you're going to war. It's a figure of speech. And October 7th, we had an incident in southern Israel, and then America was defending Israel a few weeks later from a rocket attack, and it was American anti-ballistic missiles that saved Israel that day. Where are we going? It all starts back in Genesis. This may sound weird, but we're going down memory lane real fast to kind of get us to know where we are and where we're going. The start of Israel was God promising Abraham that there would be a land from his seed that would occupy from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates River. Numbers 34 is the actual delineation of the land that God promised Abraham when the Jews were about to go into the promised land. This is the actual surveying of the land, and it exactly matches God's promise to Abraham in general terms into an actual survey. This is not Israel today. This is what God has promised before the return of Christ, how Israel will look. Don't get mad at me about, I'm not trying to play politics. This is exactly the survey of Numbers 34. And if you notice, it's a little bigger than it is now. Hence the point of our talk, building Israel. We are getting used to the clicker. Okay, Mr. James, I'm so glad that this is working. There we go. Okay, we're fine. Keep your seat, James. One of the two main people that is little known about the history of Israel is Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was known for three things in his life. He stayed in politics for over 50 years. He was an amateur artist, and he had one other hobby, and it was Jewish people. In 1904, after Churchill had spent 3 tours of duty with the British Army, he decided to run for office. He wrote 3 books. He was planning to run for office, and he became a representative in the House of Commons in Manchester, which is northwest of London, about 35 miles. There was a bill called the Alien Act that the Conservative Party was bringing, and it was to stop Jewish immigration from Russia and to start deporting them. Basically, get rid of the Jews. The belief was they're causing problems and let's just get rid of them. And Churchill rallied the entire House of Commons to vote down this bill called the Alien Bill, and just on morality. And he didn't even know any Jews. But the thing is, so many Jews came to pat him on the back and compliment him that they started meeting with him every month for the rest of his life. He was the patron saint of the Jewish state. He really, really was. A lot of people don't believe that God's going to save Israel, and a lot of people don't realize that God has a plan for Israel to save it in the end times. The reason the Jews aren't saved is it's not time yet. Everything has an appointed time. Zechariah 9 verses 1 through 5 also describes that Israel, forgive me, it's not my opinion, it says it, Zechariah chapter 9, which is the end times. In case you didn't know, Zechariah and Joel are apocalyptic books, and it's near the end of the book of Zechariah. And it says Gaza is going to become part of Israel before Christ returns. It also says Lebanon is going to become part of Israel before Christ returns. Don't get mad at me. It says it. And Zechariah 10:10 says right there, I will bring them from the land of Egypt. And by the way, that previous passage, God says, Gaza and Lebanon are my land. I'm going to acquire it. And then Zechariah 10:10 says, I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon. Okay, Gilead is Mount Hermon, the northeast mountain of Israel. And Gilead and Lebanon, of course, is Lebanon. But that is the map we just saw, the boundary of Israel. Matthew 24. Could someone get my water, please? Thank you. Matthew 24, Jesus said that he referred to Israel as a fig tree. Thank you. People think of Matthew 24 as end-time prophecy, and it is. But it says, consider the fig tree. You'll know when he puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. May 14th is the first day of the fig harvest. Just thought you'd find that interesting because God plans really, really well. Okay? And he says, when you see all these things, know it's at the very gates. It's also, May 14th is the first day that Pentecost is celebrated. What an interesting coincidence. Ooh, wow. They just picked May 14th right out of the hat. Isaiah 11:11 is my favorite end-time prophecy in the Bible. I've never heard it preached. It's one thing for Israel to become a nation state. It's another for them to return to it. This is my absolute favorite thing to read about the end times. In the day that the Lord will extend his hand to recover the remnant from the second dispersion, then it says further on, this is when Messiah returns. Where it talks about Jesus having the seven spirits of God. He's Messiah, and he's acting like Messiah among his people because he's with his people. They have received Messiah. It happens when they return to the land that has been created. It's one thing to be built. It's another. Once they've returned, Christ returns. I thought you'd find that just a little bit coincidental. Deuteronomy 34. Also, but I'm trying to build a case in case you think God has forgotten the Jews, and deal with this in about 1 minute and it's done. Deuteronomy 32 is the Song of Moses. The Song of Moses is the history of Israel before it takes place. God sees the end from the beginning. It's the entire history of Israel on earth before the return of Christ and the setup of the millennial kingdom. So, Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses, ends, and it says, at the end of time, interesting, in the end times, an atonement will be made for them. That means the Jews get saved at the end. They haven't gotten saved because it's not time yet. So don't think that God has replaced them with another tribe. Okay. Daniel 12:1, it says, but at that time, and it says the time of the end. Again, this is the end of the book of Daniel. It says at the end of time, God will deliver your people. It says, but at that time your people shall be delivered. Again, the Jews get saved at the end. God has not discarded the Jews. Hosea 6. Here's another thing, just to let us know. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he raises us up. Now, this is a reference to a day as is 1,000 years, 1,000 years as is a day. Here the Bible tells us, and we're not allowed to know the day or the hour. We're not trying to be heretical here. We are allowed to know the season. Don't just say, well, you know, your opinion, yours, and mine is mine, and it doesn't matter. No, it does matter, okay? But at the end of the second millennium is the third millennium. The start of the third millennium, it says the Jews are going to get saved at the end. There are other scriptures that say that the Great Commission is 2,000 years, the beginning of the third millennium, Christ returns. And just save that. I'm not here to debate that argument. Now, one more thing. Deuteronomy 6, 10 through 13. When the Jews were coming to Israel, God said, you're going to have a turnkey nation. You're not going to have to build it. You're just going to occupy houses, lands, cattle, goats. You just walk in and you're making money, or you're making a living. Now, I will show you in the next few minutes that Israel, when they came out of the death camps at the end of World War II, and they came to Israel, there was a turnkey nation, just like Deuteronomy 6. It was functioning in every way, water, sewer, electric, the conveniences of life, and the highest productivity of agriculture in the world when they walked in. It was a land of milk and honey when they walked in at the end of World War II. There's a reason. Okay, we'll stop right there. A little bit of history. Again, we're trying to go down memory lane to make a point. World War I happened, and it was the end of the Ottoman Turk Empire. People do not understand that the competing religion to Christianity has been around for a long time and has been fighting. Basically, Western Europe had lost the Crusades to the other religion. The Ottoman Turk Empire had been in power for 400 years at the beginning of World War I. And the end of World War I was the end of the Ottoman Turk Empire. And so when World War I broke out, Germany was against the Allies, but Turkey was behind Germany. Turkey was the real power. And a guy named Winston Churchill was first Sea Lord of the Admiralty, the head of the Navy, and he decided he was going to do an attack on the outskirts, the defenses of Istanbul, which was Constantinople, and take Turkey out of the war. And if Turkey left the war, Germany would get out of the war, and then they'd win the war. It seemed pretty good because Germany was winning at the time. Well, he failed. It was like the Alamo. 1,103 of his subordinates died. He had to resign as First Sea Lord of the Admiralty, and he was a national disgrace. In the interim, Lord Balfour, who had been Prime Minister, became Foreign Secretary to help conduct the war. And Churchill introduced Lord Balfour to two people. One person in his command had invented a contraption, an automobile that they thought could win the war of the trench warfare, and was called the tank. One of Churchill's subordinates invented the tank, you know, like the tank in military combat. They figured it could jump across the trenches and just keep going. So Lord Balfour started a tank division, and another of Churchill's friends, Chaim Weissman, the fellow that I showed a picture of, invented synthetic gunpowder. Both of these men were Jews because the Allies didn't have any gunpowder. So suddenly the Allies had more gunpowder than the Germans because of this guy, Chaim Weissman, a Jewish chemist. And they started a gunpowder division and a tank division of two Jewish people that Churchill knew because he was a friend of the Jews. And he could call up, you know, an engineer, an architect. He'd just call on the phone and they'd just bring him to him. So Lord Balfour noticed that they needed the Jews to win the war. And because they wanted the U.S. to enter the war, and because of the fear that Soviet communism had acquired so many Jews and they were going to become enemies, Lord Balfour said to Chaim Weissman, "You're going to win the war for us. What do you want?" And Chaim Weissman said, "How about a turnkey state of Israel?" And Balfour said, "Okay." And he made this declaration that for all the right reasons, Britain should create a Jewish state. It's interesting that when he made that declaration, and this is why we bless a Jew, when Donald Trump declared Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, our economy took off about as well as it ever has for 2 years. Okay? When the day that Lord Balfour made this declaration that Britain, at the end of World War I, would create a Jewish state, there was a turnaround in World War I because a man named Allenby led a group of people in southern Palestine, and they won what's called the Battle of Beersheba, and on the very day they declared that they were going to take the land of Israel for the Britain, they took the land for Britain on that day. The power of declaration, folks. Allenby took southern Palestine on that day. Blessed Jew, win a war. That's what happened in World War I. Hitler, the German leader, looked with horror at the fact that there were Jewish people in Russia behind him and there were Jewish people in front of him winning World War I. One man invented the gunpowder, one man invented the tank, and in 1918 the tanks rolled all the way to Berlin. The war was over. The British government, because of these arrangements, and because it did succeed in bringing, and the other reason is that the United States entered World War I, because of the Balfour Declaration, the British government was for the Jew for a while. And because Churchill was out of a job, they made him the colonial secretary. The colonial secretary, because as you know, we came from a British colony. The British still had a British Empire. Try to slip down here. Let's see. Okay. Winston Churchill, okay, as proceeds from the winning of World War I, Britain acquired 3 areas: Palestine, and actually Egypt, and Mesopotamia, which is Iraq. This is how Winston Churchill drew the lines for a new Jewish state. And then he was going to, on the east side of the Jordan River, have Transjordan, and on the east side of that was Iraq. And he was in charge of creating 3 countries, which he did. In the San Remo Agreement of 1922, he was the colonial secretary from 1922 on, and he created, with a guy named King Abdullah and his family, created were to be the leaders of Iraq and a new nation called Jordan on the east side of the Jordan River in exchange for not attacking Palestine for Israel. So there was peace in the region mostly for about 12 years, from 1922 to 1934, and Churchill oversaw 300,000 people settle in Palestine on the west side of the Jordan, after Jabotinsky located 30,000 originally, which got the ball rolling. And so the person that actually, and Churchill built 16 cities. He hired Jewish engineers to divert the water of the Jordan for hydroelectric power and for irrigation, and the area bloomed. For 400 years, it had been chalky soil with stone huts, and now they were making money. And with Jewish enterprise, it turned into a land of milk and honey and a turnkey nation. The League of Nations, because of the Balfour Agreement, and I'll be done with this part in about 5 minutes, but this is a setup for the rest of what we're going to talk about, is that the British government, after about 3 years of supporting the idea of Palestine, they backed on their heels, and Churchill defended the establishment of a Jewish state from then on, because the British government started to turn away from their plan to develop a Jewish state. So the League of Nations, based on Churchill's work, saw what Churchill was doing, and they gave a mandate, because they, instead of the United Nations, they had this idea of the League of Nations, which became the United Nations after World War II. Churchill so sold the people on Palestine that they made a mandate, which means that a world body has declared that Israel has the right to exist, and that Britain is tasked with building this state. Well, so the British government had come up with a policy of adopting a Jewish state. The new world body, the League of Nations, had done so. And then by the mid-30s, Hitler was coming to power, and all the Jews wanted to come to this new turnkey state. And that put pressure on the British Army that was controlling it, and suddenly the British government backpedaled. And this group called the Peel Commission came up with this plan of a Jewish state. The thing is the British government was trying from then on to minimize, and Churchill fought them tooth and nail. World War II happened, and so a lot of people say the Holocaust didn't happen, but it did happen, okay? And because there are 4 incredibly wonderful young ladies in here, I'm not going to talk about it. I was going to, okay? But just say it did happen. But I will mention, I personally met someone that survived the death camps. The worst ones were Buchenwald, Dachau, Auschwitz, and Treblinka. And Treblinka was the camp outside Warsaw, where the Germans took the Jews. And I met a woman on a MARTA bus around 1980, and it was the Sabbath, the Friday night Sabbath was about to start, and she was in black, and I asked her some questions, and she explained that she was one of those few people that ever escaped a death camp, because at Treblinka, it's the only known revolt that was successful of any of the death camps. The Jewish inmates just stormed the Nazi guards and killed them all, and just escaped into the woods, and most of them were rounded up and executed, but a few got away, and I met this one woman that got away. So I'm a witness that this did happen. A lot of people try to say it didn't happen. Yes, it did. And I asked her, how did you get out of there? And I'll try not to cry, because it was one of the saddest moments I ever saw. She's like 80 years old, frail, in a black outfit, a black Homburg. She's getting ready for the Sabbath to get off the bus. And she says, what we have to do? And she yelled, and all the people on the MARTA bus were turning around. because they did what they had to do. This really happened. So that's all I'm going to say about the Holocaust, except that Churchill tried to popularize and let the whole world know that the Holocaust did happen. And there was a saying in the death camps around the world, because they listened to radios. The Germans could not keep them from hearing the radio broadcasts. And all of World War II, when he became prime minister, he always told the whole world what was happening to the Jews, because he was their friend, since he was a legislator from Manchester. And the saying among the death camps was, "We have no bread, but we have Churchill." And they would listen to the broadcasts, and that was their only hope. At the end of World War II, there was the declaration of the, well, the thing is 30 seconds of this. At the end of World War II, there was a revolutionary war, but it wasn't Americans, it was Jews. The British Empire was bankrupt. They could not fund the 100,000 people guarding Palestine and guarding the Jews, and they started transferring them to other theaters. And then the Arabs started attacking, and the Jews were not allowed to have any guns. And so they started having a militant uprising, and from 1946 to 1948, the British had become the enemies of their own British army. It was really sad that they were gotten through the Holocaust only to be shot dead by British troops. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible on top of horrible. And the British government went to, now was not the League of Nations, it was the United Nations, and they said in 1947, "We can't handle it, we want you to take the mandate." At the same time, Churchill said something very prophetic, and then we end this discussion, go to something else, and finish in a different direction. At that point, Churchill made public speeches, and he visited the United States, and he said, "I'm looking at the future. I'm looking at who could possibly support Israel. And the mandate is not going to last with the United Nations. The only country that can carry the mandate and see it through with Israel is the United States of America." He tried to convince Roosevelt to support a Jewish state. Roosevelt was convinced that they should follow the Arabs because it was now becoming an issue called oil in the ground. So after that, there were some wars. And on Independence Day, 1948, Ben-Gurion announced the Day of Independence after the United Nations 4 months earlier had said Israel can exist. They declared their independence May 14th, 1948. And 11 minutes later, something happened. And this goes to the last 10 minutes of our talk, which is really what I wanted to talk about, is Britain would not acknowledge their independence. They were at war with the Jews. Britain had gone to war with the Jews. It was horrible. But they declared independence, and they had no guns because they were not allowed to have any. And 11 minutes later, on a Friday night, in the Museum of Tel Aviv, where they declared independence because they didn't have government buildings, Churchill got a speech from Harry Truman 11 minutes later and said, "The United States of America recognizes Israel." And the mantle was passed. In the interim, there has been so many resolutions of the United Nations against Israel, they have turned against Israel. And in 2022, there were more resolutions against there were more resolutions against Israel than any other country on earth. In 2023, there were twice as many resolutions against Israel as there were all the other countries combined in 2023. The United Nations has become a bully pulpit to run down or try to destroy Israel. 4 days before Donald Trump put his hand on the Bible in 2017, On the 16th of January, the previous president engineered a vote where the United Nations Security Council declared that Israel was an illegal state and that they must give Jerusalem up. That is an illegal settlement. 4 days before Trump put his hand on the Bible. At the end of that year, 2017, Trump's first year, on December 6th, Donald Trump declared Israel, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel in defiance of the United Nations, and we got the mandate. We've had the mandate since the Six-Day War when America found out that the Arab states were going with Soviets, and unless we sided with Israel quickly, we would have no allies in the Middle East and no chance of controlling the Middle East oil. So since the Six-Day War, America has been the staunch supporter of Israel, the leading trading partner and supplier of arms. The U.S. is the main creator of Iron Dome, which keeps Israel alive every day, and was the keeper of Israel a few days after October 7th when Iran launched those 500 missiles, and they were almost all shot down by American-made anti-aircraft weaponry. Now, a few other things. Try to finish in 10 minutes. Every one of these wars was a miracle. In the Yom Kippur War, Anwar Sadat's army was speeding across the Sinai, full speed with its tanks. And the Syrian army on the east side had 20,000 men at the base of Mount Hermon about to cross into Israel. Total surprise. Yes, the Israel had a victory at Mitla, but it turns out through military channels, and one of my relatives had this information, that the real reason there was a Camp David Accord is because the Egyptian tanks were going full speed across the desert and they all stalled. There was an invisible line in the sand. If you shot bullets, they would bounce up in the air. If you shot artillery shells, they would explode. But they could not go one more inch forward. There was an invisible shield that stopped the entire Egyptian army.
Come on. Hallelujah.
And on the east side, there were 35 men pretending on Mount Hermon that they were two divisions, and the Syrian general had a nervous breakdown and could not give the order to attack. So suddenly there was no attack, and there was no war in the Yom Kippur War. This is how Israel wins wars. This is why West Point doesn't want to copy their tactics. They don't have any. Sadat called Carter and said, I'm not converting to Judaism, he said, but I do know one thing. In fighting Israel, I'm fighting against God. Let's have peace. Carter took the ball and ran with it, to his credit. Camp David Accords, 1978 to September 17th. 1980. A lot of people don't know about the war because the war didn't exactly happen. In 1980, Menachem Begin, who was part of the peace process, invaded Lebanon 50 miles deep. And he said, I'm going to cut off the right arm of the PLO. But what people didn't know, and it got declassified later on, is that Russia had decided to annihilate Israel entirely, once and for all, in 1980, after they got their noses rubbed in the sand, literally, and the dirt, in the Yom Kippur War. They had 1/4 of their entire military ordnance of the entire Soviet army in tunnels in Lebanon in the southern 50 miles, and they were going to strike, and they had more than enough to annihilate all the Jews on earth. They were planning to have Ezekiel 38 early. The Israeli army discovered the weapons, took the Russian weapons, 1/4 of their entire ordnance of the Soviet army, more than enough to destroy Israel. They now had the Soviet arms. Doesn't this sound like something out of the Old Testament? And they handed a bunch of them to the Afghani rebels to kill the Soviets when they invaded Afghanistan with their own weapons. Isn't God good? This is how God wins battles for Israel. But there's more. A lot of people don't know who the heroes are. Right after the Camp David Accords, a guy named Mikhail Gorbachev became the Prime Minister of the Soviet Union. So I'm going to try. Oh boy, that was just really good. Anyway, we'll work with it. Anyway, Gorbachev was one of the last Russian leaders of the Soviet government. And I've talked to Jewish people, and he was also the friend of the Jews. Nobody knew. God woke me up one morning, and he said, I can use anybody. And I used Mikhail Gorbachev, who's known to be an atheist, and I put compassion in his heart, and he returned the remnant of the Jews, according to Isaiah 11. Because the Germans killed most of the 600,000 in Germany, most of the 3.5 million Poles, 1.5 million people from Eastern Europe, not counting Poland, and 1 million Russians when they invaded Russia. But there were still about 5 million Russian Jews that Hitler couldn't get to in World War II. And Gorbachev returned them. It's known among the Jews that the only person that was ever nice to them in the Soviet government was Gorbachev, and he returned the Jews. Remember Isaiah 11, it says, when I return my people from the second dispersion, Messiah is going to be coming? How about that for a coincidence? Then comes Donald Trump. And Donald Trump not only declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, but he did the Abraham Accords. And that was in 2020, just before he left office, with 2 of the Arab states. So Jimmy Carter had a treaty with Egypt. Donald Trump created a treaty with 2 other Arab states, and that's where we are now. Now, that is all kind of interesting and more than interesting. But let's go to present day. Syria fell a month ago. And December 16th, Psalm 68 was fulfilled. I'm not kidding. We are in the end times and things are happening where you can say, this day it's fulfilled in your ears. The Israeli army on Monday, December 16th, or the day next to it, took over Mount Hermon. Psalm 68 is about the end time event when Israel takes Mount Hermon, because that is the strategic high ground by which they can defend themselves against Syria, against Lebanon, against anybody. They've always wanted the high ground, and they got it. And this is where we are at right now. So the Lord spoke to me rather seriously yesterday and the day before and today. And this is what he said. And he's been telling me, people do not understand that America is in the Bible. Deuteronomy 32 says, I'm going to raise up a nation, a Gentile nation, a foolish nation, to bring my people to jealousy. God had America planned back in Deuteronomy. This is how God tracks. This is how he runs. Romans 10 and 11, it's Romans 11, Paul quotes it and he says, yes, the Jews are not supposed to come to Christ yet, but he's promised me a foolish nation is going to bring them to repentance. The Lord's been telling me for 3 years that the eagle in Revelation 12:14 that helps the woman is America. Every mammal in Daniel and Revelation is a country. So, the past 2 days, this is what the Lord spoke to me. And by the way, he spoke to me, Job 37, 27, and 28. It says, and this is God speaking to Job, Job 39, 27, 28, I created the eagle, and he is the one mammal that can ascend into heaven most high and be with me. And the Cherokee Indians believe, and I talked to a Cherokee chieftain about this, about a trip where I met a bald eagle, and he just kept sitting on my car. And he said, God has ordained you to know his secrets. And God says it in the book of Job, as strange as it may seem. So who is the eagle? It's America. This is what God spoke to me as a message to America. Last night and this morning, or actually 2 nights ago and yesterday morning, the Lord gave me this word. The year of the Jew and the year of the Gentile. That's 2025. The Lord said, simultaneously as Israel takes the land, the Gentile church will make spectacular victory in winning souls in the Great Commission. From now on, America and Israel are joined at the hip. America is the great eagle that will keep Israel from annihilation. America is the great eagle. I have chosen America to lead the Jews to true salvation. John Paul Jackson, Mike Bickle, Bob Jones, Paul Cain were told this, and God told me at least 3 times in the past year. The eagle really helps the woman a lot. America has the mandate. But there's more. I'm about to make America extremely wealthy and more wealthy to bring the Jews to jealousy in the second term of Trump. I'm about to replay Acts chapter 2 in America and douse them in my glory cloud so that they will be the template of true and powerful Christian witness so that all the Jews might be saved. I have named America the eagle in these times because the eagle continuously climbs the mountain like Moses did to get into my presence. Yes, and the last move on earth starts in America, the eagle and the old Cherokee nation, because these are the only 2 nations that ever sought me as the one true God. Yes, and the full gospel, Holy Spirit directed to complete Christianity is coming to my Jews this year. And he says, if it were not so, why would Isaiah 28:11 say that my people will speak in tongues with stammering lips? They're going to come to Christ. Yes, America, you must be a holy people to be a successful witness as the great eagle to dispense my secrets, just like I do to the eagle from my holy mountain. And you will, but at a great price of repentance, judgment, and justice. And lastly, America, I am not giving you this imminent wealth for your sake alone. It is only as a result of you blessing Abraham's seed in these end times. Bless Abraham's seed, and you will be blessed. Praise the name of the Lord.